My older brother hadn't spoken to me in 6 years, not since he forced me out of our father's company with a check that barely covered a month's rent. So when he texted me at midnight asking for a quick signature to help him close a $20 million buyout, I knew he had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought I was still the naive little sister, completely unaware that he had been illegally using my forged signature to hide federal taxes for the last half-decade. The text arrived at 12:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was awake, staring at a complex spreadsheet on my dual monitors. The message read, "Hey Key, hope you're doing great. Big news on the family business front. We're finalizing a merger and I need you to sign a standard release waiver tomorrow. Let's do dinner at my place. On me." I stared at the glowing blue bubble in the dark room. Standard release waiver. People who haven't spoken to you in 2,190 days do not suddenly buy you dinner unless your absence has suddenly become a massive financial liability. 6 years ago, right after our father's funeral, Nolan had sat me down in the company boardroom. I was 26, grieving, and completely exhausted. He slid a piece of paper across the heavy mahogany table. It was a severance and buyout agreement. He looked me right in the eyes and told me Vanguard Logistics was drowning, that Dad had left behind a mountain of operational debt, and that he was doing me a massive favor by buying out my symbolic share for $10,000 so I wouldn't carry the legal burden of a bankruptcy. I took the check because I trusted him. I walked out of the building, and my brother changed the locks the very next morning. I didn't reply to his text immediately. Instead, I opened a new browser window. I am a forensic accountant. I spend 40 hours a week tracking ghost accounts, offshore shell companies, and the invisible footprints of corporate fraud. I look at pristine, professionally audited ledgers and find the dirt hiding in the margins. If Nolan was selling the company to a private equity firm for $20 million, the company hadn't been drowning 6 years ago. It had been bleeding, perhaps, but he had kept all the lifeblood for himself. I picked up my phone again and opened LinkedIn. Nolan's profile was a masterclass in corporate vanity. CEO of Vanguard Logistics, visionary, leader, disruptor. He posted daily updates about scaling operations, accompanied by photos of himself in custom-tailored suits, standing in front of fleets of new transport trucks, or speaking confidently at supply chain conferences. He loved the word hustle. He loved the narrative of the self-made man who took over a struggling family business and single-handedly turned it into a regional empire. There were no posts about our father. There were certainly no posts about me. I was just the quiet collateral damage of his success story. The silence in my apartment felt heavy, charged with a sudden electric clarity. Anger is a messy emotion. It makes your hands shake and your vision blur. I didn't feel angry. I felt incredibly, ruthlessly focused. When you hunt corporate fraud for a living, you learn that criminals always leave a paper trail because arrogance makes them sloppy. Nolan was arrogant. I logged into the public state registry and pulled the corporate filings for Vanguard Logistics. The initial search was standard. Annual reports, registered agent updates, a change of business address to a much nicer suite downtown. Then I dug deeper. Using my professional access portals, I requested the public tax summaries and the K-1 schedules tied to the corporate entity. As a former minority shareholder, I knew exactly where to look for the structural foundation of the LLC. It took 3 hours of cross-referencing state tax database logs and property tax filings. By 3:45 a.m., the glow of the monitor was the only light in my apartment, and my coffee had gone ice cold. I found it. According to the state and federal records, I was never removed from the corporate capitalization table. The buyout agreement Nolan had me sign 6 years ago, it was never filed. It was just a prop used to get me out of the building. Why would a greedy brother keep his estranged sister on the books? Taxes. Vanguard Logistics was structured as a pass-through entity. By keeping my name attached to 15% of the shares, Nolan had been allocating a portion of the company's taxable income to me on paper, dropping his own tax bracket and avoiding federal corporate surtaxes. To do that legally, he would have needed my signature on the tax returns every single spring. Every April, for 6 years, someone had been forging my name on federal documents submitted to the IRS. But that wasn't the only anomaly. While tracing the ownership history through archived databases, I found a secondary filing, an old trust document executed by our mother before she passed away, years before our father died. It outlined that the 15% I held were not standard common shares. They were Class A preferred shares. I zoomed in on the PDF, reading the fine print. The clause was ironclad. It stated clearly that any majority acquisition, merger, or transfer of controlling interest required the physical, notarized signature of the preferred shareholder, me. Our mother had known exactly what kind of man Nolan was becoming, and she had quietly built a fire door into the foundation of the company. He hadn't just committed tax fraud, he had legally trapped himself. The private equity firm's legal team, executing a routine M&A due diligence checklist, must have hit this roadblock. They would have demanded a clean capitalization table, and Nolan, panicking, realized his forged signatures wouldn't hold up to an acquisition audit. He couldn't sell the company without the unanimous consent of all preferred shareholders. I looked back at my phone. The screen was dark. Standard release waiver. That's what he called it. He was mere days away from cashing a $20 million check. He thought he could buy me off with a plate of overpriced steak, a glass of wine, and a fake smile. He thought I was just a ghost he could summon to sign away my rights one last time. I finally picked up my phone and typed a reply. "Dinner sounds great. See you at 7. I hit send, saved the forged tax filings and the trust addendum onto an encrypted flash drive, and calmly closed my laptop. My alarm didn't need to ring on Wednesday morning. I was already dressed, holding my encrypted flash drive like it was a loaded weapon. I didn't go to my usual office. Instead, I drove to a towering glass and steel building in the downtown financial district, taking the express elevator to the 42nd floor. I didn't hire a dusty small-town estate lawyer. I hired Evelyn Thorne, a senior partner specializing in mergers and acquisitions litigation. Her office did not smell like old paper and nostalgia. It smelled like ozone, expensive espresso, and corporate warfare. She sat behind a sleek marble desk, a woman in her late 40s who looked like she dismantled Fortune 500 companies for sport. I handed her the drive. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rapid clicking of her mouse and the soft hum of the city traffic far below. I watched her eyes track across my spreadsheets, the forged tax returns, and the trust addendum. When she finally looked up, her expression was dangerously calm. He didn't just forge a signature, Kira. He committed federal tax fraud during an active acquisition period, and he did it while attempting to bypass a Class A preferred shareholder to sell an entity he doesn't fully control. "Can the private equity firm close the deal without my signature?" I asked. Evelyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Not a chance. Their due diligence team has undoubtedly frozen the asset transfer. The title on the shares is cloudy. They need a unanimous consent resolution, and they need it signed by you. Without it, the $20 million buyout is dead in the water. Your brother is cornered." "He wants me to sign a standard release waiver tonight over dinner," I said, leaning back in the leather chair. Evelyn pulled a fresh legal pad toward her. "Then we don't negotiate, we dictate." By noon, Evelyn had drafted a masterclass in corporate execution. It was a 3-part packet. Part 1, a formal cease and desist, explicitly denying the validity of the past 6 years of tax filings. Part 2, a demand for immediate financial restitution, plus a guaranteed buyout of my preferred shares at a premium evaluation. Part 3, the kill switch, a drafted, ready-to-file whistleblower report addressed to the Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission, detailing the fraudulent K-1 schedules. "If he hesitates, you don't argue," Evelyn instructed, handing me the crisp, navy blue folder. You remind him that federal tax fraud carries a prison sentence. The moment you walk into his house, you own the room. I left the glass tower feeling a strange sense of weightlessness. When you spend your whole life being told you are small, realizing you hold the detonator to someone else's empire is a profound kind of quiet. At 6:50 p.m., I pulled into the gated driveway of Nolan's house in Lake Forest. It was a massive, ultra-modern compound made of dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows. A brand-new Porsche and a custom Range Rover sat parked on the pristine circular driveway. He hadn't just built a life, he had built a monument to his own ego. And apparently, my forged signatures had helped pave the driveway. I turned off the engine, picked up my Navy folder, and walked to the front door. I didn't feel a shred of anxiety. I felt like an auditor walking into a failing bank. I rang the bell. Less than 10 seconds later, the heavy oak door swung open. Nolan stood there, wearing a casual cashmere sweater and a smile so wide it looked painful. "Key, look at you!" he beamed, pulling me into a sudden, suffocating hug. I kept my arms strictly at my sides. He smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. He pulled back, clapping his hands together. "It has been way too long, seriously. Come in, come in." Vanessa is finishing up the charcuterie board in the kitchen. I stepped into the grand foyer. The house was immaculate, staged like a magazine cover. Vaulted ceilings, modern art, a floating glass staircase. It was the perfect backdrop for a self-made millionaire, provided nobody looked at the basement foundation. "House is beautiful," I said, my voice perfectly flat. "Thanks. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into this place," Nolan laughed, leading me toward the open-concept kitchen. "The logistics game is brutal, but it pays off if you know how to hustle." Vanessa, his wife, turned around from the marble island. She gave me a tight, polite smile, wiping her hands on a linen towel. "Kira, so nice to finally have you over. Nolan has been talking about this all day." I bet he had. I glanced at the kitchen island. Right next to a platter of artisanal cheeses and a bottle of $300 wine, there was a manila envelope. Resting neatly on top of it was a silver Mont Blanc pen. They weren't even going to wait until the main course. Nolan saw where my eyes landed. He rubbed the back of his neck, adopting a tone of forced casualness. "Yeah, I figured we could just get the boring admin stuff out of the way before we open the good wine. Just a quick signature to clear out some old legacy paperwork from Dad's era. Takes 2 seconds, and then we can celebrate." He tapped the silver pen against the marble counter, his eyes locking onto mine. He thought he was looking at the little sister he had easily discarded 6 years ago. I set my navy blue folder down right next to his manila envelope. "Sure," I said quietly. "Let's talk about the paperwork." Nolan slid the manila envelope across the cool marble of the kitchen island. He picked up the silver Mont Blanc pen and held it out to me, his smile tight and practiced. "Just need your initials on page 3 and a full signature at the bottom of page 5, he said smoothly. "Standard liability stuff. Then we eat." I didn't take the pen. I didn't even look at his envelope. Instead, I opened my navy blue folder. "I am not signing a standard release, Nolan," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "And I am certainly not signing away my rights during a $20 million private equity acquisition." The smile vanished from his face so fast, it was almost comical. The silver pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the marble counter. Beside him, Vanessa stopped pouring the wine. The kitchen went dead silent. "How do you—" Nolan started, his voice suddenly lacking all its corporate polish. He swallowed hard. "Who have you been talking to?" "I haven't been talking to anyone. I've been reading," I said. I pulled the first document from my folder, the trust addendum, and placed it perfectly in the center of the island. "Mom left me 15% Class A preferred shares. You cannot execute a transfer of controlling interest without my unanimous consent. The buyers found out, their lawyers froze the deal, and you panicked." Nolan's face flushed red. The visionary CEO persona evaporated, leaving behind the panicked older brother who was finally getting caught. "Listen, Key, I was going to tell you. I really was. Once the ink was dry, I had a whole plan to cut you a massive check. $1 million, clear. I just needed to get the red tape out of the way first. You wouldn't cut me a check for $1 million, Nolan. You locked me out of the building for $10,000, I said calmly. I pulled out the second stack of papers, the K-1 tax schedules. I placed them right next to the trust document. But the shares aren't the real problem, are they? Vanessa leaned in, her eyes darting between the papers and her husband. Nolan, what is that? To lower your corporate tax bracket, you kept me on the capitalization table, I continued, ignoring her. And to make it look legitimate to the IRS, you forged my signature on federal tax returns every April for the last 6 years. That isn't red tape, Nolan. That is felony tax fraud. Nolan backed up a step, gripping the edge of the counter. The blood had entirely drained from his face. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Dad left a mess. I had to keep the lights on. I saved the company, Kira. You saved your lifestyle, I corrected, glancing at the designer kitchen. I pulled out the final document, the drafted whistleblower report for the IRS and the SEC. I didn't set this one down. I held it. Here is what happens next. My attorney, Evelyn Thorne, has sent a demand letter to your legal team. You are going to buy out my 15% at a premium valuation, and you are going to pay immediate restitution for the fraudulent tax allocations. If you delay, debate, or try to negotiate, this report goes to the federal authorities tomorrow at 8 a.m. You can't do this, Nolan shouted, his hands shaking. You'll bankrupt me. The private equity firm will pull out if they see this. They should pull out, I said, closing my Navy folder. They are buying a company built on forged documents. I am just giving you a choice. Pay me what you legally owe me or go to federal prison. Have your lawyer call mine. I turned around and walked out. He yelled my name, begging me to come back to the table, but I didn't stop. I opened the heavy oak door and walked out into the cool night air. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. The silence I left behind was heavy enough to crush him. Real life doesn't always tie up neatly in a single night, but paper trails move ruthlessly when the truth is finally exposed. Within 48 hours, the private equity firm formally withdrew their acquisition offer. The M&A auditors flagged the capitalization table inconsistencies, and the investors vanished. Nolan couldn't meet my attorney's financial demands because Vanguard Logistics was cash poor. His entire wealth was tied up in the illusion of the pending sale. 3 weeks later, the IRS initiated an audit into the company's past filings. Nolan lost the company. He had to liquidate the Lake Forest house, the Porsche, and the Range Rover just to cover his mounting legal defense fees and federal penalties. His LinkedIn profile went completely dark. The self-made man narrative shattered the moment someone finally asked to see the receipts. My life, on the other hand, went back to normal. I received a substantial settlement during the corporate liquidation, but I didn't buy a sports car or a mansion. I bought a quiet, secure future. I went back to my dual monitors, tracking ghost accounts and finding the dirt hiding in the margins of pristine ledgers. People think that silence is a weakness. They think that if you don't scream when you are wronged, it means you have accepted the defeat. But as my mother knew, and as my brother learned the hard way, the most dangerous people aren't the ones who yell the loudest. The most dangerous people are the ones who quietly read the fine print, gather the evidence, and wait for the exact right moment to let the paperwork do the talking. Never let them turn your silence into permission, and never, ever sign something just to keep the room comfortable.